The modern world has given us comforts that no king of the past could have dreamed of. We have central heating, hot water at the snap of our fingers, access to any information through a small glowing rectangle in our hand. Our medicine is able to conquer diseases that 1,000 years ago crippled entire villages. We live longer. We live safer. We live in a world of unprecedented material abundance. Against this background, the life of a medieval English peasant seems like hell. Dirt, hunger, disease, disenfranchisement, and hard labor from dawn to dusk. Any attempt at comparison seems absurd. But what if behind this facade of progress, we have lost something fundamentally important? What if, in some key aspects that define the quality of human life, the medieval English peasant lived a better, fuller, and more meaningful life than you do today? This question may seem provocative or even crazy, but what if we put aside our stereotypes about the Dark Ages and take a dispassionate look at the facts? The answer lies in a series of ingenious, sometimes shocking, and utterly counterintuitive aspects of peasant life that modern civilization has either destroyed or replaced with pale surrogates. This is a story not of wealth, but of genuine well-being. It is a story of how the absence of technology forced people to be stronger, smarter, and closer to each other. Stay with us to the end and you will learn why the peasant had more vacations than the modern office manager, why his body was more athletic than yours and his microbiome was healthier, why he didn't know what a mortgage and an existential crisis were, why his work made more sense in entertainment, was better for brain development. This is a journey back in time that will make you look at your own life in a new way. This statement sounds like heresy. We used to think that a peasant worked from dawn to dusk without a break. This is true, but only in part. His labor was not subject to ticking clocks and deadlines, but to the natural cycles of nature and the religious calendar. And this calendar was surprisingly generous with weekends, providing a rhythm of life that to a modern burned-out person might seem like a real luxury. First, the agricultural year was extremely uneven. There were periods of hellish labor, such as the spring sowing and the fall harvest, when they worked 12-16 hours a day. During these times, the entire community, from the elderly to the children, mobilized to fight the weather and time. But there were also long periods of relative quiet. Deep winter, after the crops had been threshed and all the necessary repairs made, was a time of slow, measured activity. Midsummer, after weeding and before haymaking began, was also a time of respite. Unlike our monotonous work year, his year was like a roller coaster. Stressful peaks were followed by calm plateaus, giving the body and psyche a chance to recover. But the main source of recreation is the church, and this is where the fun begins. The church calendar was literally dotted with feasts. In addition to 52 Sundays, which were strictly non-working days, there were 40 to 50 obligatory church holidays a year. Working on these days was considered a grave sin. Let's do the math. Christmas was celebrated for 12 days. Easter and the week following it was a time of rest. The same was true of the Trinity. Add to this the days of all the apostles, the days of the most important saints, both local and Christian, feasts like the Purification, Candlemas, Midsummer, Lammas, the first day of harvest, and St. Martin's Day. Historian Juliet Shore, in her study The Overworked American, estimated that the average medieval peasant rested for about a third of the year. That's 120 to 150 days. Compare that to your standard vacation of 28 days and a dozen public holidays. Of course, on holidays, the peasant did not lie on the couch looking at the ceiling. His recreation was active and social. He went to church, but Mass was not only a religious event, but also a major social event. After the service, the churchyard became a place for fairs, games, and gossip. Festivals were occasions for communal feasts, often organized at the expense of the church, so-called church ales. There were archery contests, fist fights, and ball games resembling a wild mixture of soccer and rugby, with one village playing against another. There were dances, songs, and performances by itinerant artists. It was a complete break from routine labor, a change of activity that gave both physical and psychological recovery. He had no smartphone to call his boss on, no email to check. The vacation was absolute and complete. Why is it better? Our lives are subjected to the artificial rhythm of the 5-day work week, an invention of the industrial age. We work with the same intensity in sunny July and dark December, ignoring our body's biological clock. We have learned not to truly rest, being constantly connected, suffering from the productivity culture and the guilt of inactivity. The peasant lived in a natural, cyclical rhythm of tension relaxation. His life was like the breathing of nature, while ours was like the monotonous hum of a conveyor belt. This rhythm, with its frequent and complete reboots, was incomparably healthier and more stable for the human psyche. Modern man spends huge sums of money on fitness clubs, personal trainers, and marathons to compensate for the damage caused by a sedentary lifestyle. For the medieval peasant, his entire life was one continuous, functional workout. His body was not a burden to be dragged to the gym, but a prime working tool, perfected by constant, varied, and natural exercise. Let's look at his training plan in more detail. Plowing the land with a heavy wooden plow, which had to be constantly guided and pressed with all your weight on it, was hours of forceful work involving the muscles of the legs, back, bark, and shoulder girdle. Working with a scythe during haymaking is not just waving the tool. It is a complex, coordinated rotational movement that engages the oblique abdominal muscles, broadest muscles of the back and legs, developing explosive strength and flexibility. Threshing grain with a chain is a classic high-intensity interval workout, alternating powerful strokes with short pauses. Carrying grain sacks, chopping firewood, building hedges, all of these required real, functional strength. As a result, the peasant had a physique that today would be called CrossFit athleticism. Archaeological studies of skeletons from that period show powerful bony relief at the sites of muscle attachment, indicating enormous muscle mass. He didn't have an office back or flabby muscles from hypodynamia. His body was perfectly adapted to the tasks it performed. It was not the aesthetic beauty of a bodybuilder, but the rugged, practical power of a man who could work all day. Women were not lagging behind, daily carrying dozens of liters of water from the well, grinding grain manually on stone millstones, working in the vegetable garden with a hoe. All this formed incredible endurance and strength. Their cardiovascular system was in excellent condition thanks to constant outdoor physical activity. Of course, their lives were full of risks of wear and tear. Arthritis, back problems from lifting weights were common. But these were problems from overuse of the body, not disuse. Their bodies wore out from a life full of movement, ours degenerate from lack of it. Diseases associated with hypodynamia, obesity, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, were virtually unknown to them. Why is it better? We've separated labor and physical activity. We work while sitting in a chair and then simulate physical activity in the sterile environment of a gym. This is profoundly unnatural and inefficient. The peasant's body was one with his work. He derived physiological satisfaction from hard labor, from the pleasant fatigue in his muscles in the evening. He did not suffer from the gap between mental and physical activities, alienation from his own body. His life was holistic, and his body was a strong and effective tool, a source of strength, not of constant problems and complexes. He lived in his body, not just carried it around with him. The epidemic of loneliness is one of the major scourges of the 21st century. We live in huge cities, surrounded by millions of people, but we often feel completely isolated. We seek the meaning of life in career, consumption, self-development, suffering from anxiety and depression. For the medieval peasant, the very raising of such questions would have been unthinkable because the whole structure of his life was an antidote to loneliness and meaninglessness. He was not an individual, but part of a dense, interconnected organism, the community. The family, neighbors, the whole village were one. A man was born, lived and died in the same environment, surrounded by dozens of people who knew him from his childhood. Personal space as we understand it was almost non-existent. Several generations lived in a hut, sleeping together, working side by side. This constant closeness, which we would have found stifling, created an impenetrable cocoon of safety. Every joy, a wedding, the birth of a child, and was shared. Any grief, illness, death, fire, was also shared, and neighbors came to the rescue immediately without waiting to be asked. This dense social fabric was a powerful psychological support system. Man did not need to look for his place in the world. It was given to him from birth. His role and responsibilities were clearly defined. He was a son, a husband, a father, a member of the village community. The meaning of his life was obvious and undeniable. To feed his family, to cultivate the land, to fulfill his duty to God and the community, to pass on his land and his skills to his children. He did not need to be troubled by the questions, who am I and why do I live? The answers were built into the very structure of his being. Labor was not a career, but a service to his family. Faith was not an abstract philosophy, but a daily practice that gave meaning to suffering and the hope of salvation. Of course, this life had its disadvantages: lack of privacy, the all-seeing eye of neighbors, and the brutal pressure of public opinion. Gossip was the main instrument of social control. Deviation from the norm could lead to ostracism, which was tantamount to death. But the price we pay for our individual freedom and privacy is often existential emptiness and agonizing loneliness. The peasant had no time or opportunity for agonizing reflection and self-searching. His life was full of concrete, tangible meaning and human warmth. Why it's better? Modern psychology and anthropology argue that the human brain evolved to live in small, close-knit groups, tribes. For 99% of our history, we have lived this way. Anonymous, atomized life in a metropolis is a profoundly unnatural environment for our psyche. The social structure of the peasant village, for all its flaws, was much better suited to our innate needs for belonging, security, and common purpose. They did not have psychotherapists because the whole village performed this function, supporting, monitoring, and healing its members through daily interaction and shared rituals. We are obsessed with eating healthy. We seek out products labeled organic, non-GMO, farm to table, and pay a lot of money for them. We drink probiotics and kefirs to improve our microbiome. For the medieval peasant, all his food was by default what we today call healthy, and his relationship with food was incomparably more intimate and sensible than ours. Everything he ate was grown by himself or his neighbors on land that knew no chemical fertilizers or pesticides. The fertility of the soil was maintained by manure, ash, and a three-field system where the land rested and regenerated. His cow grazed in a meadow rather than eating antibiotic-laced feed. His vegetables were seasonal and local. Sure, his diet was monotonous and often sparse, but it was clean. He did not consume trans fats, preservatives, flavor enhancers, refined sugar, or any of the other advances of the modern food industry that are now associated with the epidemic of chronic disease. Let's take a closer look at his table. The mainstay was a thick chowder called pottage, which was always simmering over the hearth. Everything went into it: grains, barley, oats, legumes, root vegetables, turnips, parsnips. In spring, it was enriched with wild herbs, young nettles, wild garlic, dandelions, which were a real vitamin bomb after a long winter. His bread was made of whole wheat flour, full of fiber and vitamins, not bleached high-grade flour, devoid of all goodness. Even his teeth, though chipped from the sand and small stones in the flour, suffered from cavities far less often than ours, due to the almost total absence of sugar in his diet. The main drink was not pasteurized juice or soda, but ale, a live, unfiltered drink, a product of natural fermentation, rich in B vitamins and beneficial yeast. He ate a lot of fermented foods: sauerkraut, pickles, cheese. All of this, combined with constant contact with the land, animals, created an incredibly rich and diverse gut microflora. Modern research shows that a poor microbiome is linked to a myriad of problems, from obesity and allergies to depression and autoimmune diseases. Our sterile, refined food kills off beneficial bacteria. The microbiome of the medieval peasant was orders of magnitude richer and healthier, giving him a stronger and more adaptive immune system. Moreover, his life included periods of natural fasting. The end of winter and early spring, when old supplies were coming to an end and new ones had not yet grown, were times of forced starvation. This, paradoxically, could have a health-promoting effect by triggering the autophagy, cellular self-cleansing, processes that today's trendy diets like interval fasting try to induce. Why is it better? We have traded food quality for quantity and availability. Our food is beautiful, long-stored, and available year-round, but it is often dead, overprocessed, and lacks nutritional value. The peasant ate simple, coarse, but living food. His food system was completely local and sustainable, independent of global supply chains. He intuitively understood what modern science is just coming to. We are not only what we eat, but also the trillions of microbes that live inside us. And in this invisible internal war for health, he, for all his poverty, was definitely winning. The two major plagues of the modern urban dweller are the daily commute and housing, whether it's an unaffordable rent or a lifetime mortgage bondage. These two factors eat up our time, money, and nerves, being a source of chronic stress. The medieval peasant was completely free from both of these modern tortures, giving him a completely different quality of life. His home and his office were one and the same. The field where he worked started right outside the doorstep of his hut. He didn't have to stand in traffic jams, jostle for public transportation, or spend hours of his life on pointless travel from point A to point B. His entire living space was compact and unified. The workshop was part of the house, the vegetable garden part of the yard. This complete integration of life and labor eliminated one of the greatest sources of frustration and fatigue in the modern world. He had more time for his family, for rest, for the labor itself, because this time was not wasted on the road. The housing question was also quite different. The peasant did not own land in the modern sense. It belonged to the lord of the manor, but he owned the right to live and work on it, tenure, and this right, according to custom, was inherited. It was his ancestral tenure. He paid no mortgage on it. He built his house himself from local, free materials, wood, clay, straw, with the help of his family and neighbors. Of course, his life was not free of obligations. He paid rent to the Lord, often in produce or labor. But the system, while unfair, was part of organic life. Payments were tied to the harvest, and in a hungry year, it was possible to ask the Lord for a deferment. Relationships were personal, not with a soulless banking system. The absence of a mortgage burden gave him a whole different level of psychological freedom. His house was not a financial asset or liability to be bought back in 30 years, but an extension of his family, a place where his ancestors had lived and where his children would live. It engendered a deep sense of rootedness, stability, and belonging to the land that we have almost completely lost. Our home is often a temporary shelter, a commodity on the real estate market, a cause for endless anxiety. His home was his world, his center of the universe. He didn't have to choose which neighborhood to live in. He was spared the agony of choosing. His path was set, allowing him to focus all his energy on life itself. Why is that better? We spend a third of our lives earning money for housing and another part of our lives getting to that housing. This double burden is a source of constant stress that undermines our health and relationships. The peasant was spared from this. His life was integrated in one space, making it more holistic and harmonious. Not having a mortgage and commutation didn't just save time and money, it kept him mentally healthy, gave him a sense of a strong, non-financial connection to his home, and freed him from two of the heaviest shackles of modern slavery. The modern office world, for all its comfort, has spawned a whole epidemic of psychological problems. Burnout, imposter syndrome, and a sense of meaninglessness of one's labor. Many people work on a small part of a huge project without seeing the final result, without realizing the value of their contribution and constantly doubting their competence. The peasant was the complete opposite. His labor was hard but absolutely concrete, meaningful, and gave deep psychological satisfaction. His labor was cyclical and visual. He plowed the ground and saw it become soft and ready for sowing. He threw seeds into it and saw the sprouts appear. He tended them and saw them grow. He harvested, and there it was, the grain that he could touch and that would feed his family for the winter. The entire cycle, from seed to bread on the table, passed through his hands. The result of his labor was tangible, measurable, and vital. He did not have to explain to himself why he worked. The answer was obvious: to live. He could not think of imposter syndrome because he knew exactly what he could do. Plowing, sowing, mowing, building. His skills were real, and their value was undeniable, not only to him, but to his entire family and community. He was a master of his craft. Although he was not formally free, he had a high degree of autonomy within his daily labor. He decided for himself when it was better to go out into the field, how exactly to fix the plow, which plot to weed today. This autonomy, as modern research shows, is a key factor in job satisfaction. Of course, his labor was full of risks. Drought, flood, locusts could destroy all his efforts. But even in the event of failure, the reason was clear and was in the outside world, not in his own incompetence or the meaninglessness of his position. He was fighting nature, not corporate bureaucracy or abstract KPIs. Moreover, for the believer, his work was a form of service to God, a fulfillment of the covenant, "In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread." This gave his work a transcendent spiritual meaning. The struggle for the harvest was an annual drama with its tension, climax, and denouement. And the successful harvest was an occasion for sincere, deep joy and gratitude. Why it's better? Anthropologist David Graeber, in his book The Work Delusion, described how millions of people today are engaged in labor that they themselves secretly believe to be useless. This leads to deep spiritual devastation. The labor of the peasant was the antithesis of delusional work. It was hard, but it was never meaningless. Every action he took had a direct and understandable consequence. This direct link between effort and result is a powerful source of psychological satisfaction. His work allowed him to enter a flow state, a state of total absorption in an activity where skills meet the challenge. Our modern work, with its constant meetings, notifications, and reports, often gets in the way of achieving this state, making us less productive and less happy. We live in an age of disposable things and produce mountains of garbage that poison the planet. The concept of garbage was practically non-existent for the medieval peasant. In his world, everything had value and was reusable until it decayed and went back into the ground. This was not a trendy eco-consciousness, but a fundamental principle of survival based on a deep understanding of the value of materials and labor. He was a genius of recycling and zero-waste production. This was based on a worldview born of scarcity. Every object, a clay pot, an iron nail, a woolen thread, was the result of immense labor, his own or that of a local artisan. To throw something away was tantamount to throwing away some of one's life energy. Take food. Vegetable scraps and leftovers went to feed pigs or chickens, closing the food cycle. Bones were boiled to the last to make broth, and then could be burnt and ground into bone meal for fertilizer. Nothing was thrown away. Clothing was the clearest example. An old, worn-out shirt was not sent to the landfill. It was mended as long as possible, covered with countless patches. When it could no longer be mended, it was cut into usable pieces. The best pieces were used for patches for other clothes. The lower quality ones were used for children's toys and leg wraps. The most dilapidated rags of linen or cotton, if there were any, were carefully collected and sold to rag makers, who supplied them to paper mills. This is how paper for books and documents was born from old clothes. Construction and everyday life followed the same principle. Old thatch from the roof or the floor became fertilizer. The ash from the hearth was used as a detergent. Lye is excellent at breaking down grease. An abrasive for cleaning dishes, fertilizer, and a component for soap making. Broken clay pots were not thrown away. Its shards were ground into crumbs and added to clay to make new pots, making them stronger. Broken wooden tools became firewood. Even a worn leather shoe was taken apart. Pieces of leather were used for patches, straps, or loops for a chest. The most important factor was the almost complete lack of packaging, which makes up the lion's share of our trash. Grain was bought in its own reusable sack. Milk was poured into its own jug. Ella drank from a shared wooden bowl or their own mug. Food was not wrapped in plastic and cardboard. This world was free of the visual and physical pollution that we consider the norm. Even human waste was used. Urine, as we know, was a valuable chemical reagent for cleaning wool and in dyeing, where it served as a color fixative. Animal and human dung was the main fertilizer, a guarantee of future crops. It was a perfect closed ecosystem, where the output of one process became the input for another. Why it's better? Our economy is based on a linear produce, use, throw away model. This is incredibly wasteful and leads to environmental disaster. The system in which the peasant lived was cyclical in nature. He intuitively understood the laws of nature, where there is no such thing as garbage. This approach, born out of poverty and necessity, is today the most advanced idea of sustainable development and the circular economy to which we are desperately trying to return through green technology. He practiced it by default, living in material poverty but in ecological harmony. Today's job market values narrow specialization. We are often good at one thing, but completely helpless in other areas of life. When we lose our jobs, we often lose our identity as well. The medieval peasant was a generalist, an orchestral man who mastered a dozen vital occupations. His competence was his main capital. These skills were not learned from books. It was tacit knowledge passed from father to son, from mother to daughter through observation and practice. It was knowledge embedded in the body, in the hands that sensed the right moisture in clay, in the ears that determined the quality of wood by the sound of the axe, in the eyes that predicted the weather by the color of clouds and the behavior of birds. Let us translate his skills into modern language to appreciate their complexity. He was a practical agronomist. He knew when and how to sow different crops, understood soil types, practiced triple cropping, and other forms of crop rotation to preserve fertility. He was a meteorologist. He read the sky and the wind to decide when to start haying. He was a veterinarian. He could take a cow to calve, fix a sprained sheep, and cure simple diseases of livestock with herbs. He was a builder. He could build a house from scratch using only an axe and a knife, knew how to properly harvest wood, weave a frame of rods, and mix clay and straw for the walls. He was a carpenter. He repaired tools, made simple furniture, wove baskets and hedges. He was a butcher and stockman. He could butcher an animal carcass and preserve the meat for the winter. He could also be a brewer, a tanner, and even a bit of a healer, knowing the properties of hundreds of local plants. The woman was also a multi-specialist. She was a spinster, a weaver, a dyer, a seamstress. She was a cook, a baker, a brewer. She was a pharmacist and physician for her family, using herbal infusions and ointments. She was in charge of the vegetable garden, poultry, and dairy. This wide range of skills gave incredible resilience and independence. The peasant was not dependent on hundreds of services and specialists as we were. He could provide himself with almost everything he needed. This engendered a sense of self-reliance and deep self-respect. His skills were not abstract, but absolutely real and applicable here and now. It was a form of anti-fragility. A failure of grain harvest could be compensated for by craft or hunting. His life had many supports. Why it's better? Our narrow specialization makes us effective cogs in a big machine, but very vulnerable and dependent. When we lose our jobs, we often lose our identity too, because we don't know how to do anything else. The peasant was self-sufficient. His resume was inscribed in his hands and in his knowledge of the world around him. This versatility and practical competence is a form of true wealth and freedom that money cannot measure. We have traded this resilience for convenience and real skills for the ability to use software that will be obsolete in 5 years. We suffer from chronic sleep deprivation and insomnia. We use pills, sleep tracking gadgets, and blackout blinders in an attempt to hack our sleep and squeeze it into our rigid work schedules. We have created an entire industry around sleep because we have turned it into a problem. The sleep of the medieval peasant was subordinated not to an alarm clock, but to the main regulator of life on earth, the sun, and was a source of restoration, not anxiety. His sleep was flexible and seasonal. In winter, when the daylight hours were short and there was less work, peasants slept much longer than in summer, 10-12 hours each. They went to bed shortly after sunset and rose at dawn. Their circadian rhythms were in perfect harmony with nature. More importantly, they lived in true darkness. Once the hearth went out, their world was plunged into thick, impenetrable darkness, broken only by the light of the moon and stars. This deep darkness, unattainable to us due to light pollution, is key to the production of melatonin, the sleep hormone. They were not exposed to the artificial blue light from screens that disrupts our natural cycles. Moreover, historian Roger E. Kirk put forward the theory that people in the pre-industrial era were characterized by biphasic or segmented sleep. People slept for a few hours, first sleep, then awoke in the middle of the night for an hour or two. This period of wakefulness, called watch, was not considered insomnia, but a productive and valued part of the night. It was a quiet, peaceful time for reflection, quiet conversation with your spouse, prayer or intimacy. It was a time to ponder their dreams, which were considered important messages. Then they would go back to sleep until morning. Second sleep. Many modern sleep problems, especially night wakings that cause us to panic, may be an echo of this natural biphasic pattern. We try to suppress it, thinking of it as pathology, while it may be our biological norm. Living in almost total darkness in the absence of a rigid schedule allowed the peasant to follow this natural rhythm. He had no sleep anxiety, the obsessive fear of not getting enough sleep and not getting his obligatory 8 hours. He simply slept when it was dark. Why it's better? We treat sleep as an annoying necessity to be made as efficient and short as possible. We have turned a natural process into yet another task to fail at. The peasant treated sleep as a natural part of life, flexibly adjusting its duration to the seasons and the body's needs. His sleep was not a monolithic 8-hour block, but a more complex, segmented process that gave not only physical, but also spiritual rest. He didn't fight his body, but listened to it. This approach of acceptance and harmony with nature was incomparably healthier than our eternal battle to optimize sleep. Our leisure time is often passive and isolated. We spend hours scrolling through social media feeds, watching shows alone, playing online games with strangers. Our algorithm-driven entertainment is designed to be addictive and hold our attention for as long as possible. The entertainment of the medieval peasant was the exact opposite. It was active, social, and served not to kill time, but to give it meaning, strengthen community, and sharpen the mind. On long winter evenings, when all the work was done, family and neighbors gathered together around the hearth. Their entertainments were active, social, and required work of the mind. Chief among them was storytelling. The village elders were living libraries, keeping hundreds of tales, legends, lives of saints, and heroic ballads in their memories. It was not just entertainment, but an essential mechanism of education and transmission of cultural code. Through stories of cunning foxes and foolish giants, children learned moral lessons. Through ballads about Robin Hood, they learned about justice. The listeners were not passive consumers, but active participants. They shouted out lines, asked questions, shrieked with fear at tense moments. The atmosphere created by dancing shadows from the fire made every word weighty and memorable. Music and dancing were an integral part of any celebration. Instruments were rare, but a village might have its own fiddler or piper. The main instrument, however, was the human voice. Everyone sang. Songs accompanied work, feasts, and rituals. The dances were simple, energetic, and always collective. Round dances, stream dances, line dances where everyone moved as a single organism. It was not a demonstration of individual skill, but an act of communal unity, a way to physically feel part of something larger. They played board games such as Nine Men's Morris, which required deep strategic thinking as much as chess. They riddled each other with riddles, honing their wits and out-of-the-box thinking. Their festivals were not an occasion for shopping, but real community carnivals with songs, dances, ritual games, and performances. The pinnacle of physical entertainment was folk soccer, a violent and chaotic game between entire villages, where an inflated pig's bladder was used as a ball and the goalposts could be the churches of neighboring parishes. It was a ritualized form of venting aggression and asserting collective identity. In their leisure culture, there was virtually no division between performers and spectators. Everyone was a participant. All these entertainments took place face-to-face. They required live communication, emotional involvement, the ability to listen and speak, to read nonverbal signals. They strengthened social ties and passed on cultural values from generation to generation. They didn't have an endless stream of content, but the leisure time they had was quality, rich, and finite. The holiday was ending, and its end was eagerly awaited, which made it all the more valuable. Why it's better? Modern digital entertainment often leads to social isolation, anxiety, and addiction. Doom scrolling, Aimlessly scrolling through negative news has become a veritable disease that drains our mental resources. Peasants' entertainment was the antidote to this. They were inherently therapeutic because they were based on live human contact, co-creation, and physical activity. They did not take energy away, but gave it. Their leisure activities were honed over centuries to fulfill essential social functions: learning, cohesion, and cognitive development. Our leisure time is honed by algorithms for one purpose: to hold our attention for the sake of selling advertising. And in this fundamental difference in purpose lies a gulf in quality of life. Of course, no one in their right mind would want to return to the Middle Ages, with its infant mortality, lack of hygiene, and risk of starvation or simple appendicitis. Our material comfort and security is the greatest achievement of civilization, and it would be foolish to give it up. But when we compare our lives with those of the medieval peasant, we see that progress has a price. We have paid for material prosperity with a break with nature, a loss of strong community ties, a loss of real-life skills, and a sense of meaning in our existence. The peasant's life teaches us that the true quality of life is determined not only by the quantity of things, but also by the quality of connections with other people, with the land, with one's own labor, and with one's own body. He was poor materially, but rich in aspects in which we today feel a growing deficit. His life was not simpler, but perhaps in some ways more holistic than ours. In studying his experience, we are not called to go back, but perhaps we can find clues to make our own lives today a little better, more meaningful, and more human. If this journey into the past has got you thinking, and you want to learn more amazing facts about what our ancestors could teach us, give us a like and be sure to subscribe to our channel. There are many more stories ahead of you, turning the perception of the past and present upside down.